Welcome guys. In this section, I'm going to talk about one important topic, and this topic makes Cypress unique in the market. No other tool is supporting such kind of features. So let's try to understand what is this method. And of course, by seeing the screen, you know that method name is Intercept. Okay, so Intercept method manage the behavior of HTTP requests. So when you interact with your web pages, so you would be calling a HTTP APIs and you get a response back, and that response renders on the UI. Okay, but that all happens in the back end. So from the front end, you may not know all that information. Now, let me take you to one practice app. So rahulshettyacademy.com/angular app demo. Okay, so in this website, so this is like a practice app where you can browse the products, select the products, add the items to cart, continue shopping. Okay, and once you have the items in the cart, you can check out and play around. So in the same website, there is another tab called library. So when you select the library, you will get all the books available in Rahul Shetty Academy library. Okay. So there is one request call going to this page, which is giving us the response back with all the data. Let's see. So let's come to the home page, Angular app demo. So you can also reach that library page by clicking on this button. So I will open my developer tools. Okay, and go to the network tab. So here where you can see what all API calls we are making. So once you click on this virtual library, and if you scroll down, so this is one API is hitting the server. Okay, when you click on this, so this is the request URL. So this URL is being sent to server, and here it says that get me the book with author name Shetty. And when you select response tab, this is what you are getting the response back. So this response is consumed by front end. In this case, this is built on Angular. So Angular is consuming this response, and then it is displaying all the data in tables like this. Okay, so this is how you are able to fetch the data from backend. So ideally, so the guy who developed this have tied up that API call to this button. So whenever somebody clicks on this button, that API call will be made and you will get the response back. So that response will be rendered in the table, or you can click on this library also. Okay, so when you select it again, you see, you can go to the network tab and you can see what all requests and responses you are getting. To filter out, you can select XHR so that it will clearly give us all HTTP request and response details. So we just understood that this is the URL it's being hitting and we are getting the response. So can we modify this request and responses? Generally people will say no, because this is like complete different API thing, right? You need to use some other tools like REST assured, which will help us to automate API calls. Okay, so ideally people will come from Selenium background and then they think that it's not possible, but using Cypress you can also modify and intercept your request calls, your response calls. Okay, so Cypress will have the access in this network level as well to modify anything here. Okay, now you might get doubt. Okay, Cypress have this access, but how that is going to help me? There are a lot of ways it can help us. Okay, so many times you might hear this when you're working in your project, that people say that this is not right candidate for automation. Okay, because, or people say that this is a flaky test and it's completely depend upon data, that when data changes your test may fail. So these are like common reasons we hear, and we avoid automating those scenarios. Okay, now for example, let me explain you here. So there are a lot of books displayed here. So if there is only one book displayed in the table, then you should see a message saying that sorry, there is only one book available. I have a screenshot here. Look at this. So in this screenshot, there is only one book available. So this application, this website will give you this message that sorry, we have only one book available. Right. So this scenario came for testing. So ideally, what people will do is they will find lot of accounts, so that for which account this only one book is displayed. Okay, assume that you are logging into this app. Okay, most of the cases when people log in, you will see lot of books, but there are some data you found at that particular day that it is returning only one book, because this is not in our hands. Okay, this is coming externally. The one thing what you have to note here, the data what you are receiving is coming from external API. Let's assume that you don't have control on that API. Okay, so today it returned lot of records like this, and tomorrow it might return only one record, because this is coming from external library and you can't control that data. So for that day, you will check different accounts and see which account have one single row, and you will test this scenario, right? And you will say it's pass. And if someone asks you that, are you automating this? Then you might answer that this is not right candidate for automation, because we never know how many books it will return. If I write a test with this account and tomorrow if that account return multiple books, then this message should not display, right? And your automation test will check for this message and it will break. So we will stop writing test for that. Okay, so this is how people do. I'm just giving you one example. But using Cypress, there is a way to hack this. So one thing first you need to understand about architecture of your application. You just need to go to developer and ask like how I am able to see all these books. Then he will explain you that, okay, so there is one API call, and when you click on that library button, we are calling that API and you would get a response back like this. All this response we are carefully capturing and rendering it on the front end using Angular or React or anything. You can see book name, rest assured with Java. Okay, this guy printed here ISBN RSU IL number 2301. This is one record, right? And this is second record. So if you need to first understand how this data is coming, and you need to call that API and see the response. So let's use Postman and see how this API is behaving. I'll tell you, just follow me. You will know how to hack this and make this scenario work using Cypress. Yeah, so this is the service. Okay, we are making the request call and we are getting response like this. You see, these are the different books written. For each book, these guys are creating one row. Okay, so using Cypress, you can just tell that you can basically modify your response. If this is the response, if you get from your external source, you can modify that response and you can return only one array. Okay, there are a lot of items present in this array, right? You can just return one index out of the all the indexes of this array. So if only one index, if you return as a HTTP response, your Angular will keep an eye on what is the response I am getting. If it returns only one item, so only one row will be pre-populated here, and then you should see this message comfortably, right? So that means you should mock your response. So that is giving some random response every time from external source, and you can mock it and intercept that to return a new response based upon your requirements, and based upon the response you design, you can keep validations on your UI. So that's the magic. Okay, so you can read it here that you can modify HTTP responses by changing the body, right? So right now this is the body, right? You can change the body and you can change the status codes before they are received by the browser. So Cypress can go to this level and modify your HTTP responses. Similarly, you can also modify your HTTP request bodies and before you send it to the server. You can modify after you receive the response or before you send your message. So here, this is the request. Okay, so on clicking this button, we are sending this request to the server. You can modify this also to give different data using Cypress at runtime when your test is executing. And also it helps to perform integration testing between UI and backend. So all this you can do with the help of Cypress Intercept. Okay, so step by step I will show how to mark response, how to mark request, and how to perform integration testing between your API calls and the UI. Okay, so first let's get started with modifying or mocking your HTTP responses. Now our goal is to display only one record and verify if this message is coming. That is what I want to test. And if you want to do it through Selenium, it's not possible. Okay, you might find one account which gives you one row today, right? But when you run your test tomorrow, and that time it might give multiple records and your test case will fail. If you want to make it test always pass, when you have dynamic data like this, dynamic data is the most common problem in everywhere, in every project with Selenium. So people just avoid those tests saying that these are not right candidates. But let's see how to do that using Cypress. So as I told, there is a method in Cypress which is called intercept. Okay, so this intercept have different type of syntaxes. Okay, so if you see their official documentation, if you scroll down, it support different type of parameters and different type of syntaxes. So one common syntax where it always comes as handy is a request object, response object. So here you have to pass the request, what you want to intercept, and in the response object you want to give the response how you want to mock it. Okay, so let me show you. So in request object, basically it's nothing but it takes as an JSON format like this. For response also something like this. Okay, so two JSON, one request object JSON and another is response object JSON. Right. So in the request object, basically we should tell Cypress to have an eye on that particular request call, because once that request call is made, instead of giving actual response, we have to give our mock response, right? So how do you tell that to Cypress? So first you have to give the request on which you want to keep an eye for mocking. Okay, so this is the method is a get. So key value properties method colon is a get. You can check your network tab to get all these details. Okay, and the URL, and this is the URL this is getting called, right? So copy this. Okay, nice. So just these two details are enough for us to make a call. Now Cypress will not make this call. Cypress will just listen for this call to be made on the browser. Okay, it will keep an eye on it. Once this call is made on the browser, then Cypress will ask you, all right, I just came to know that this call is made, and let me know if I want to send the real response or do you want to mock it and send your own response. Okay, yes, in this scenario we want to mock it. So that mocked response you have to send in your response object. Okay, so you can pass different parameters here, that if you want to mock status code, you can give that. So right now let's give status code 200 only, which is same as the original one. The important thing is body. So this is what we want to mock, right? And if you wonder like how would I know that I can give method URL in request and status code body in the response, you can look at their official documentation. Request object properties, select this and you will see what all you can give in your request. So in our case we used method and URL. Similarly there will be response object properties, and here we are using status code body. If you want to mock headers, then you can give the headers or status message. Okay, right. Now So this is the actual response you are getting from that service call. I'll remove all the indexes here, and oh, I think I can't edit this. Let me take into one notepad and let's remove all of this. Oh, so many. Yeah. So I have only one data now. Right. This is our body. So don't disturb the body structure, because if it is not in the proper format, then you would see the error. So we are just removing the remaining indexes of this JSON, and let's pass that into our Cypress test and put them in quotes. Okay. Oh yeah, quotes not required for body level. Sorry. It looks for JSON response, so that's what we sent. Nice. Looks interesting. And if you observe what we have done now, so we have successfully intercepted the request call as Cypress is listening to it. Once this call is made, instead of sending a real response, Cypress will send this response. Okay. So ultimately, first parameter is the request parameter. Okay. And this second parameter is the response parameter. And we are closing that intercept method. We opened here and we are closing here. Okay, don't confuse between all these braces, because there are a lot of braces here which will make you confused. Or you can write everything in one single line, so that way you will at least. I'll cut and paste it here. Okay, nice. Now let's go and do actual automation. So we just gave the instructions and now Cypress will take care. Now you can go ahead and do a normal automation just like how you do for all other apps. So first you have to land on this web page. Okay. So let's start on the top, cy.visit, and this is our website. So once you land here, you want to click on this virtual library button, because on clicking that button only that service call is getting made. Okay, looks like we have class and this is unique. So I will go ahead and use this button class primary. cy.get. You can use CSS. Button is the tag name, class equals to. Right. So on this button, you want to make a click operation. Perfect. So once Cypress executes this click method, this browser will make this HTTP call. Immediately once browser make that call, Cypress will be notified here and it is ready to send this response. Okay. So all this intercept method, I will collect it into one reference variable dot as, so that you can refer that using this variable. Let's say book retrievals. Okay, so I'm just having that into one variable because you have to wait until Cypress intercepted your response. So like this, you can do cy.wait and you have to wait until this reference is solved. Okay, basically this particular method will yield one result, and you can also say that it will yield one promise. That promise we are collecting into one variable, And here we are using wait method to tell that wait until this promise is resolved. That means this promise will be resolved after Cypress successfully sent mock data back to your browser. So if you don't provide this, then without, I mean, before giving the response back from the Cypress, your test will continue, and that will create a lot of confusion, because as the data is not rendered yet, your test will start failing. So we are explicitly making our test synchronous by waiting until this promise is resolved. Okay, so that happens only when you want to yield your result into one variable and wait that variable promise to get resolved with wait method. Okay, so after clicking this button, how does your application will behave? That you get a response, right? The response what you see here on, where is that postman? Yeah, this response have nicely made that into table format in Angular. But now what we did, we mocked it and we are sending only this one data. Okay, let's see how our page behaves now. I'll save this project. I'll open the Cypress runner. You see? Awesome. Your test already passed. You can rerun again if you want, but you can look at the results here and you see that message, sorry, we have only one book available. How come? How come this is possible? Okay, let me run this test again so that you would see the output correctly this time. So it's as usual going to that web page, just like how we have done in our normal loading, and you see it is not giving us this data. So that's the beauty of Cypress, and this is what I want to show you. See, and when you click this link, ideally all this should come, right? But see, Cypress is showing only one data because you mocked that response. How come that became possible? Because your Cypress is very keen and it's keep on listening to your all network request. Immediately when it encounters this, because we told intercept this, immediately when it encounters this, it stopped the response given by this URL and instead it gave its own body response. That response being rendered to the network, because your browser is just relying on this API response to show the data. As you have tweaked the data, browser don't know all that, right? It just uses the data what it gives. So Cypress tweaked it and gave the new response back, and with that response it rendered on the page. As you have sent only one, you can see only one data, and now you got this message. So your test will never fail. Okay, now you cannot complain that data dependency here, data is dynamic, that it might not work tomorrow if you see more records. Okay, so now right click inspect directly on this and you would see that locator anchor P. Okay, tag is P, right? So you can put a validation now nicely that cy.get P. So we should verify the text there, right? So I should have dot text. So that text what we want here. Okay, sorry, we have only one book available. All right, so I'm running it again. You see, assertion passed. So that's the beauty of mocking your responses, and you can test any scenario what you have in your application. So if you are using Selenium and if you have such test cases in your project, just do a POC using Cypress. Talk to your dev team like what our request response call is happening on this page, and scan those results and try to mimic the behavior of your response and see if you are able to get the message like this. All right. So this is one scenario. So there is one more scenario where industry-wide people are relying manually without writing automation test. So which is checking an integration between backend and UI. Okay. So there are many cases that you might come across a bug when you are integrating your backend code to render on the UI. Now let's take the same example. So here you see all the records came as a response. So what does the developer do? He will make sure that every record showing in the response have to come on the table here. But are you exactly checking that whether the response what you come from the API is matching here? So when you test, people might test that whether column names are present and tables are displaying. But can your automation check? When I say automation, it's a Selenium, like any other QTP, Selenium, or whatever you use, Protractor or anything. So can your automation tool can validate whether the data what you see here is the correct data? You can't tell that. You can do only UI level automation, but you cannot put a validation to see whether data is correct or not. For that, you have to compare the data what you are getting from your API response, and that response and this is matching. That kind of validation you cannot do with a pure front-end tool. But using Cypress, as you have access to the network level, you can compare and see the response what you are getting from your API call. That response data is correctly rendering on the browser or not. Okay, so I'll explain you one scenario where there went a huge bug in Ben's and Nobles. So that is one hub of library. So you can Google about Ben's and Nobles. So what happened, like an API gave you a response with 14 records. Okay, let me show you. Yeah. So 14 records you got in your API response, and when user is trying to render on the front end, so they'll just have a for loop like this, like for I equals to 0 and I less than 14, and they will ask to render all in the front end using any front end tools like Angular or React. If they forget and start from index 1, then they will skip first record. Okay, so this is an array of 14 records, so they should start from 0th, right? If they start from 1, every time when they want to retrieve, the data will skip this 0th index. Okay, all the data what they will see in the front end will start from first index, because that guy have written a wrong code in interpreting that JSON response. Okay, so that you have to catch. You have to make sure the data what you are coming from response and front end both are same or not. That kind of integration you have to perform, which we call as an integration testing. Okay, so to catch this bug, in our scenario, we want to make sure that number of records our API is giving should be equal to number of rows present in this table, isn't it? So right now our API is giving 50 records. So that's why we have a 50 tables or 50 rows, sorry, 50 rows here. So that you have to put validation. For that, you really need not use a real mock response, because you never know how much records that API is returning every day, because that data is dynamic and people will say that we cannot automate it. Today it returned 50. If you put an assertion in your Angular that it's written 50, tomorrow it might return less. So for that also, let's rely on this mock data only. So what we can do here, let me put a logic that let's get the length of the response array, and that length of response array should match with the rows of the table, even if it is real data or mock data, doesn't matter. So if you have this validation, your test will pass. And if somebody misses this logic, and if they mess up with any logic, then obviously number of rows in the table will not match with the length of the array, right? So +1 or -1 will be difference. So this is the assertion you want to put and say that you have properly tested that what you are getting from backend to front end. Kind of integration testing scenario. So how would you do that? Let's see. So if you want to get the length of the response array, first of all, you should have the access to response, what browser is giving. So right now you don't have access to response. You mocked your response, that's all. So how you can get access to response? There is a way here. So you have cy.wait, right? So this wait method will resolve the reference, and here on this wait itself, that will, after this promise is resolved, it will give two properties for us. One is a request property and one is a response property. You can write like this, request and response. Okay, right. So this request will hold the information about what is the request went to this uh, end URL, and the response will be the what is the response you got from this endpoint. Okay, so in this case we are only concerned about the response. So what you can do here, response dot body. So response object holds this information, right? When you say response dot body, then you will be able to retrieve this. And ultimately this is an array, isn't it? If you observe carefully, this is an array and there is one index in it. And if you want to length of the array, if you want to know the size of the array, it's very simple, right? You can do dot length. This will give you the size of that array. So right now as you are marking this, this should return only one record. Okay, so that means as it is returning only one record, here you should see only one row. So how would you test it? So for that, what I will do, I'll right click, inspect. You can use a tools like CrowPath or Selectors Hub to validate your XPath or CSS. You see, for every row there is a tag called tr. So if there are 10 rows, you will see 10 trs. In our case, we are marking the response, so there will be only one row. So when I do tr, right now it is giving 51. Okay, 50 rows actual data plus 1 is nothing but your header. Okay, so every time plus 1 you have to do because you are getting header as an extra tr. So in this case, when you mark, you will have only one row and one header. So that means total 2 trs only you should have with your marked data. Okay, so let's put a validation in that way. So first I will get the count of the tr tags, cy.get. You already know how to get the size of the tags, right? We have done many examples in the past. If not, I would recommend you to check out my previous lectures where we have done extensive exercises on retrieving the row count, column count. So using tr tag, I retrieved the number of rows, and this length, I'm putting an assertion, should have dot length. So the length of this row, okay, that should match with your response dot body dot length, isn't it? Okay, so this response dot body length is 1. For one row, how many trs you should see? 2. One is the original data and one is a header. Okay, so plus 1, let's do. Right, so we are adding plus 1 for the main row header, and this is our actual content. 1 plus 1, 2, and trs also should be 2 only. Okay, so this is how you can put validation and see if the response body is properly rendering on your browser. So in my case, it's a tr. In your case, it could be anything other tag or any other css. Okay, so your overall goal is to make sure that how that items in that array are rendering on your browser. That related component, you should take a locator and get the size. Okay, and you are able to get access to that response with the help of yielding this wait, because I explained you, right? We are waiting until this is resolved. Once this is resolved, it will yield two properties, request and response. And once you get a response and response dot body, because I shown you what are the response object properties. You can do response dot body, response dot status code, headers, everything. And on that body, we are applying length to get the count of this array. Okay, let me save this and check back your Cypress test to see how that behaves. Great, it's done. You see, all are pass. Expected to have length of 2, assertion pass. So let's do one magic here. I will remove or put plus 5. Okay, so it returns us only one item, plus 1 plus 5, 6. So we are making sure asking that there are total 6 rows should be there in our page, and now it will fail. You see, it's trying to make that asset valid, but if it cannot, it failed. You see, it says I found only 2 rows, but you are asking me 6. It will uh, fail. Now, to make this work, you can create a body with 5 more indexes. So let me create one more. I'll just add one more. Okay, so we are basically mocking our response. So this time it will return 2, right? Okay, so this should be still valid. So it returns 2 plus 1 3, and TRs also should come 3, right? So no matter how many you pass, this is a generic statement, generic assertion, because at runtime you are getting that value. How many rows? 2 rows. And here also 2 data we are passing. So it's passed. But another thing failed here. Oh, when you don't have one book, okay, that message that sorry we have only one book will come only when you have one book. As that book number increased, it failed. Okay, so that's why make sure you mock with the right data for your right validation. All right, so that's how you can have a check from your response side and make sure that's properly rendering on UI side. This is one kind of scenario. I'm just giving you different scenarios where you cannot achieve with other automation tools and how you can achieve same using Cypress. So in this lecture, let's understand how to mock HTTP requests and purpose of mocking it. So right now, when you select this library every time, so in the request every time the author name is going as a Shetty. So let's say you logged in into this app using Shetty account. So that's why at runtime based upon your user ID, this is getting pre-populated. That what if I enter author name as another user? Okay, so you should not be able to view that, right? Because you are into Shetty account, so that's why you are able to see the books from this library which is related to Shetty, because you are authorized to see only the books of Shetty author. Okay, let's say there is another author called Malhotra. So in your account from your portal, you cannot view the books of Malhotra, and that when you try to view that, then you should get an forbidden 403 status code. Do you know about that? 403 status code says that you are not authorized. We generally get as a forbidden. That server understood your request but refuses to authorize it. Okay, so it should tell that as you are not the right user, I will not give the details for you. And that is what you want to test, and you want to make sure that data here should not display. It should give me error saying that you are not authorized to view the books. But can you test it using front-end automation tools? No, you can manually also, you cannot test it. Okay, so how do you test it manually? You can do it, but using external middleman tools like Fiddler, or there are some Burp Suite, there are some proxy tools which will help you to intercept your request. But from your regular testing, you cannot check it, because whenever you click virtual library, always it is showing the books of Shetty. Okay, if you want to see that what happens when the books of Malhotra are hitting, how can you manually test it? Because on this button click, by default your backend front end code is just giving you the books of Shetty. But if someone asks you to check Malhotra books, even you cannot do it through manual testing also. You should bring some other tools like as I said, Fiddler and Burp Suite. But using Cypress, yes, not only testing manually, you can also automate it by intercepting your HTTP requests. Okay, let's see how to do that. For that I will create another class. Now I am going to use another syntax of intercept. If you remember, I told you in the beginning that intercept comes with different syntaxes. Okay, so it's up to you what you have to use. In our case, now to show and demonstrate this, I will be using this one, cy.intercept, a method, URL and route handler. This is one of the way to declare intercept. Okay, so what is the method of that HTTP call. That's a get, right? So get, and next you have to pass the URL. Obviously you know the URL of it. This is the regular URL. So we are just asking Cypress to keep an eye again for this request to happen. Okay, so once this request got triggered, and you know when this will get triggered, this will get triggered when you click on that browse library, right? When that button got clicked, this will be triggered. And here this is a request, right? Now you can take this request details. Let me write in other line. Yeah, so all the details what you entered are now captured in the request object here. That's what root handler. Okay, so URL and the method, everything is now captured here, and I can start writing to modify this object now. Okay, on this request object, now I will modify this URL. You see, you can modify this URL method by giving a new URL here. So this is the original one, right? Author name Malhotra, right? So in this manner, on this request property, and I told you like how you can find request object properties here. Instead, in the previous lecture, the whole syntax is different. Don't get confused. Here, the syntax take request object as a first parameter and response as a second parameter. This you can use if you want to mark your response. But if you want to mark your request, then I would recommend you to use another syntax of this. This is exclusively to marking your regular request. And now on this request object, it yields, these two will yield a promise, and we resolve that promise. Now on that object, we are modifying this URL to this URL. Okay, new URL. After you modify the URL, you can hit a method called continue on your request object. When you call this method continue, then what happens? Then this request is being sent to the server. Okay. Okay, one second, I missed this. So once you are yielding the promise, you are writing everything inside this block. Okay, right. So this method now will hit the server with the modified request. So modified request is being sent, and once you send to the server, you get a response back. So that response you can again collect as the reference variable here in the response object, and on this response object you can put any validation on your response object. Okay, so in our case now, so we modified a request object and we sent to the server and we got response back, and now you want to verify whether that response dot status code is 403, because we just realized that when you are trying to reach your server with another user, instead of Shetty, if you go with Malhotra on your Shetty account, then your API call should give you back a 403 error and say that you are not authorized. Okay, so this is how you can check with Cypress. So right now our application will just give the data even if you give with any user, because we did not implement any security as of now in this application, but your test should fail, right? So ideally we are expecting 403, and now your test should kick you saying that I got 200 success. But don't run, we still did not click on that button. So this is like only intercepting. So we are giving the knowledge like what to do when you receive this request. So in the earlier lecture, we told that when you receive this request, go and mark this response. In this file, we are saying that when you receive this request, first modify your input request and then send it to server with continue method, and that will yield response object. On that response object, we are putting validation that it should be status equal to 403. Okay, and all this intercept we have to yield, right? Yield it into one reference variable. Let's say dummy URL like this. We need to resolve this promise because this intercept method yield a promise. So you can say wait until this is resolved. put that in a quote. But you missed one prime thing, that first, to make all this request call happen, first you have to click on that button, right? If you don't click that button, this will never get activated, because this method will be called only after you click on this button. If you don't click on this button, this method will never be called, and this will be never be stored, and there is no point in what you are doing now. Okay, right, let's see. I will save the project. It should fail for us because our app right now is not having that mechanism, so it should kick us with fail. Fake test 2. Okay, what happened here? It says it returned 200, but we want 403 expectation, so that's why it failed. So right now this is still loading here because your test failed here. Okay, it failed at line number 17 only. So this intercept method did not finish. So but we are telling wait until this got finished. How it will wait? Because it failed at line number 17 only. So it interrupted in the middle and it did not yield anything. So it is waiting until this to get yielded, right? Okay. So for now I will comment it because you saw that it's failing as it's returning 200. But let's see how that data is rendering in the output. I will save the project again. Okay, see, this time you received only one record, and this time we did not mock anything. Earlier we got like 50 records, and we also got one record. When we got one record, we are very clear that because we mocked, that's why we got one record. But why this time we are receiving only one when there is no mocking in place? Because there is no author name Shetty here. We modified our request. This time it's going with author name Malhotra, isn't it? Let's see. Right click, select this request dummy URL, and you see author name equals to Malhotra. So this time it is not using Shetty, and that intercepted request is being sent to the server using our Cypress, and the results what we are seeing here is the Malhotra results. If you see something like this in your application, then there is a big security bug in your system. Okay, even this app have that as security issue. As this is dummy app, I did not implement security issue. Okay, so if you are working in any banking application or any application which have username and password, after you log in, try to hit any endpoint with another user information, and you see if the data is loading. If it is loading, then anyone can hack it. Okay, using tools like Burp Suite and Fiddler, you can Google that tools. Using that tools, you can intercept your request, or you can do using Cypress also. So now using Cypress, I am able to see the page of another user called Malhotra. Okay, but ideally when you do a testing from your normal application, you won't see that, right? When you are manually testing the page, you will never see that. But using Cypress, we are able to mock and see how that is behaving. So in this manner, you can go ahead one step and perform security testing also using Cypress. So ideally, when you are trying to access the data which is not allowed for your user, developers will give the response as a 403. So that you have to put assertion in your code and make sure that passes. If it gives 200, that means data is coming back, and that's a security bug. So in this manner, we will modify and intercept our HTTP request to check security bugs in our application. I am not sure how many of you guys doing this now, but not only doing it manually, you can write automation security test cases also using Cypress by intercepting your request calls, and you can put validations on your response status codes like this. Okay, so that's how the Cypress power is. All right, so that's pretty much about this intercept. I hope you guys really enjoyed this, and I request you to play around this dummy app what I have, and instead of sending one single data, try to send multiple data and see that this message is not coming up, or go and mock the request and put another user and see how the data is behaving, because all these are available for practice. So that's pretty much about intercept in Cypress. So one last topic before we wrap up this
API testing concept with Cypress. So till last lecture, you have seen on how to listen to your HTTP calls, and then you captured after that HTTP call got happened. Okay, but you did not hit that call. So you did not hit that call to the server. You made your UI hit by selecting the button or whatever, but the job what you did is you listened to that call, whatever it is happening from the browser, and then you either gave the details of that responses or you mocked the responses, but you yourself did not hit that HTTP call, right? So now if you want to do pure API testing, that you itself hitting the API and getting the response back without depending upon this UI completely. Now I want to do pure API testing and without bringing any web into picture, then I can simply make this HTTP request calls and get responses using the request command. I expect that you have some basics of API testing to watch this lecture. So if you are not aware of basics, reach out to me through email. I will help you to give some API testing information so that you can go through the videos and come back here to understand this. Basic knowledge is enough. I'm just showing that how to hit APIs using Cypress without depending upon any browser or listening, just direct hit. So the request command accepts firstly what type of HTTP call you are trying to make, if it is a get, post or delete, and the endpoint where you are hitting. And if it is a post, then you have to give the body JSON payload of hitting that API. All those details, if you pass into this request command, then this will hit the API call and get the response back as a promise. You have to resolve the promise and extract the response object so that you can put validations on that. It's very, very simple. Firstly, to demonstrate that, I will open one of my own API, whatever I designed for practice for students. It's a library API. The endpoint is this, where the service is located. So this is the resource. So basically base URL / resource to add a book. So we were actually adding a book to the library, and all the book details we will send as part of our JSON payload, like name of the book, ISBN, in which IL it gets stored, and the author name. All the details will be given as a payload, and it's a post request. So we will hit this endpoint so that this book will get stored in the library databases, and it will give information on which IL it is there. Okay. The output what you get after this API call is made, if it is success, then you will get a response like this: message successfully added, and your book will be assigned a unique ID number. This ID number is combination of your ISBN and IL number. So if you concatenate both of them, that would be your ID number, which you will see in the response. So that is the concept. If you have aware of any tools like Postman to actually do this testing, look at here. So this is an endpoint, and this is an complete payload, and just you need to hit on send button so that you will get a response back. Make sure you provide this ISBN and IL. These should be unique. If there is already existing book with the concatenation of these two information, then it will say that book already exists. So you have to give the unique value so that it will get stored. Now when you hit this request with these details, look at here, successfully added. Okay. So let's try to actually complete this validation in this lecture. We will do that using Cypress now. So with their documentation, let's do it in very simple fashion. Let me create a new test for. I'm not going in depth and teaching all the concepts of API because it's not really required. So we use Cypress only whenever we require on demand. Okay, there could be a scenario that you have to fill the form, but that data is dynamically coming from API. So you can happily do this API call, get the response, capture the values, and feed it into your front-end test dating. Okay, you can put all that information in your test data, which wherever required in your front-end apps. In general, if you want to achieve it without using Cypress, we will use a combination of Selenium plus REST Assured API. REST Assured is one of the REST API testing framework, which will help us to do all the API validations. We will combine those two tools and solve the scenario of getting the data from response and feeding it into the front-end applications. But using Cypress, you can do everything here with the calls, whatever I'm showing this lecture. All right, so I will simply copy a few details. So here there is no UI, so you can forget about cy.visit. It's just a pure API call. So let's read the documentation and complete the test accordingly. First, cy.request method. Let's capture this here. Method for our API here is post. Okay, so let me replace this first with post. Next, URL, which is nothing but an endpoint where you are hitting your server. So the URL to add a book is this. I will give this documentation to download, the Word document, whatever I prepared to understand this API. You can use this and try to create a test to validate API using Cypress. And now body. So you have to also send a JSON payload to tell which book you are adding and what is the IL number, ISBN number, and who is the author. That's the JSON payload, right? Okay, so you should place for a body. Perfect, that's it. So this is very simple. Now, when you hit this command through Cypress, when you run this particular test, this will actually hit the server and get the details for you. And now you need to extract the response and you need to put validations, right? And the response, whatever it returned, it's again promise. So resolve the promise dot then capture the response, whatever it returned, and then work on that. It's as simple as this. So we were grabbing that, you know, right? How to get and resolve the promise. Dot then basically you write like this function and then you got response out of it. Okay, so right now when you run this test, it will just does whatever you are doing here. When you click on send button, you will get a response back, right? Same thing this test also does and gives you the response back. And in this response object have everything where you can start now validating. Let's say that if you want to validate whether message is successfully added or not in your output, then this response object have response. Let me show you. Dot. Look at here. IL, author, everything is coming. Body. So when you say response dot body, whatever the response body you got back, you can actually retrieve it. So this is your body, right? And if you want to validate this message, you can simply say expect response body to have property. Basically, we were validating the property message here to have property key value pair. This is the message. Nice. And then you are validating if it's coming as successfully added or not. Perfect. So you are already familiar with these kind of assertions, right? So here response object is what it returns back, and when you do response dot body, it gets complete captured of the response whatever you see in your output. From there, these are multiple properties available in your response. Message is one property, ID is one property. So we were actually validating that from the complete response body for message property, verify whether it is having successfully added message or not. If it is there, that means we can confirm that our API got success on hitting and getting the response back. So this is how you can put validation. So there are a lot of validations you can actually try on that request method, that specific command. You can actually come back to the assertions and check out here. Response.body length, total characters of the body is 500. You can validate. And if you want to see the status, if it's getting 200 or not. So what is the status we were expecting here in the response? So here it is 200. So now you can also add a validation that make sure that it returns 200 as your status. Okay, just read the official documentation to understand what kind of different assertions you can put. If you just wonder how would trainer know that response.body is how, if you want to grab the body of the API response, I just learned from here. Everyone should come to this page and learn, because the authors of Cypress have written that this is how you need to do. Everyone reads that and follow and implement that in their live projects. So if you want to verify whether this text is present in your response body, then you can say dot its body should include. Read out this documentation to understand. But the main assertions are properly displayed here. So that's really helpful for you to go through this. And also give the unique values here. If not, you might get a message saying that book already exists. If the ISBN and IL number, whatever you give, if already exists in database. And one more thing, you have to put promise on request command. Why are we putting on at this it? This is wrong. Right. It should be here. For your request command, we were resolving the promise and then we are working on that promise. Okay, we need this. So let's run this test. Okay, I will go to my Cypress test runner and say API test.js. It seems it started here. Oh, it's done. It's very fast. Let me rerun again. Perfect. Look at here. Assertion is passed, expected 200 to equal 200, and the expected message of successfully added is also validated. So this is how you can do API testing as well with your Cypress. It's very, very easy compared to any tool. The only documentation you should have handy when you are working with this is the request command. Keep this documentation handy and just pass the value just the way how they were telling you. Look at here now. If you have any method, URL and body to test, we did the same way, right? Post method, URL and the JSON payload you give, and then you resolve the promise. From the response, in the body, you are looking for name property should be Jane. Okay, we did something like this. So this will be the best example for you to understand and explore more on the API testing. But as I said, if you have a number of API test cases and if you project is more of complete API automation, then I would suggest you to have a dedicated tool like Rest Assured framework for API testing. So that's all I have, guys. Thank you.